Waiting for this thing to boot up and get connected. Back to our last speaker here, which Dr. Williams. I have a daughter-in-law who is a healer, quote, healer, and she can see auras. And this goes, I thought it was all hocus pocus. And then it goes back, I took a Reiki healer, a master Reiki healer, and I took the magnetometer and put it between her hand and the patient. And amazingly enough, there was a strong electromagnetic field radiating out of her hand. So that could have something to do with it. Oh, much more. Yeah, we did comparisons, like many times. So that could have something to do with it. You've been hearing a lot about supposedly Dr. Bonley's magnetic pad over here. It is a patented device. It is the only magnetic pad that is unidirectional in its magnetic field. It actually pulls more of the Earth magnetic field down through your body and back into the Earth. And so you're getting a lot of those free electrons. Now, why do I say free electrons? Well, there's some good research done at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and they're beginning to think now that magnetism is nothing more than valence electrons going in great big orbits. And when you have a wire with electricity flowing down it, you're exciting the valence electrons on the copper or the aluminum, and they're going in great big loops around the wire. Now, this is an interesting concept, because if you think in that terms, then we're pouring a lot of electrons through the body. And is that a good thing? If they're low energy, it's a good thing. If they're high energy, then it depends on how high of energy. And we found with MRIs, you can go up to 100,000 Gauss without causing a problem. You get more than that, well, then you begin to have a problem. So that's all they're approved to, is 100,000 Gauss. They started getting tissue damage above that level, too higher energy level. Now, why am I telling you about this? Well, we're talking about a relatively low flow of electrons down through your body. And the physics of this simply are, if you have a magnetic field going this way, then you will actually cause electrons to spin this way, you see? And if it's coming this way, they'll go this way, they'll go counterclockwise, like this. Now, this is very important, because in the first 2 hours of sleep at night, you produce most of your human growth hormone. That causes your cells to divide. So the structural cells of your body are orientated to a magnetic field that comes out of the sky and goes into the Earth, opposite in the southern hemisphere. Why is that important? Remember, we talked about the Lamar formula, which it's a directional formula. And if you have the magnetic field going the way that the Earth magnetic field went through your body when you laid down to sleep, well, then you're going to get an increased speed proportionate to the increase in magnetic field. So those valence electrons are going to be going faster. Now, some electrons will be going slower and some will be going faster, but the valence electrons will be going faster. That's the important thing. Now, what happens when they go faster? They cut more lines of flux because they're going through the flux field much faster. So it's like a generator. So you're getting an increase in charge. Matter of fact, on that little bed over there that the lady's sitting on, if she was laying down there, so she's perpendicular to the magnetic field, she would be getting an increase in charge of about 2,000 times the charge on her valence electrons. Now, why is that important? That's important simply because at high energy levels, you have electron transfer. And the Lamar formula ends up saying this leads to electron transfer. First it says it leads to precession, means wobble or vibration, which in turn leads to electron transfer. So we're enhancing all chemistry with that type of a device. Now, what is the difference between that type of device than what you have here? We've seen several devices here over the weekend. They are doing some of the same because it's an electromagnetic field that they're stimulating with, but one is alternating, the other one is DC. You get a certain amount of push in the mitochondria, so you're getting a certain amount of increase in ATP on an instantaneous basis, not on a continual basis, but a little bit of shot of more ATP. And this is a good thing, but they also, because you're changing the polarity on the cell wall, you're getting cell flushing. So positive, negative, going back and forth. So you're getting cell flushing. You're also, and this is the primary effect, because the ATP effect is just instantaneous. The primary effect is acupuncture. And anytime you subject the body to a frequency, period, I don't care if it's 60 hertz or 5 hertz, if it's more than 20 seconds, the body goes into emergency response because you're interfering with the frequencies coming from the brain to the body. And we found this with extensive research. So all you have to do is put a frequency in there that is any frequency. It could be one of the natural frequencies, and you'll get an acupuncture effect if you leave it there more than 20 seconds. Now, is that a good thing? Sure, it's a good thing. Sure, it's a good thing because acupuncture has always been good, hasn't it? You just don't want to overdo it. And one of the rules of acupuncture is an hour a week max, or you'll deplete the chi. Now, in a critical condition, a broken bone or something like that, then you can do it more because you're pulling down on the reserves, and so you don't, you know, all of us walk around with a reserve amount of vitality. In case we have an accident, we need that extra vitality for healing. So when you're actually doing acupuncture 3 or 4 times a day, the response begins to drop. And so your acupuncturist will say, come back next week and we'll do another treatment. Question.
So if you say, so being in like on the bed, that's more than an hour a week.
Okay, we're getting to that.
Okay.
Good question. What's the difference between the bed and the other? It's frequency, folks, frequency. There is 0 frequency there. Okay? So this is just like the Earth magnetic field. It doesn't cause an emergency response or an acupuncture response. It's the same thing as the Earth magnetic field. And we're pulling more of the Earth magnetic field down through your body. See, most people don't understand the relationship of the brain to the rest of the body as far as vitality is concerned. Becker did a lot of work on this, Dr. Robert O. Becker, New York State University. He's the inventor of the PEMF device for non-case. Matter of fact, when we first invented the large MME, which we have to use DC current to energize, the big electromagnets, we found if we had any frequency whatsoever in that DC, there was no healing. And this got to be a major problem because we thought we'd be smart and have our power converters a long ways away from the actual device, the MME device. And the rooms close to the power converters, they were getting great healing, but the ones a long ways away weren't getting any healing. So I hooked up the oscilloscope, and guess what we found? The radio station over there was inducing an electromagnetic field onto those cables that were traveling from the power converter to the MME. And with that frequency coming in and being induced in there, there was no healing. So this has been a long learning curve for us. And we know now that we have the best results. If we put the power converter in the same room, we have the MME. And this is just a backup to what we're already talking about. What's the difference between what they're doing and what I'm doing? I'm just, you might say, providing a good garden for which the body can grow new tissue. And the purpose of the MME is tissue regeneration. It's not to cure inflammation and things like that. That can happen. It's to actually grow new tissue. And when I say that, I will give you an example. We've treated now over 100 cerebral palsy children. 85% of them had significant return to function by just treating their brain. MS patients, 75% of them have had, some of them are completely cured, had a significant improvement in their condition. We're growing myelin sheath. Now, we found recently...
Is that with the pad?
Pardon?
Is that with the sleep pad?
No, we're talking about the 10,000 pound DC magnet, okay? By the way, that's a good question. That's how I got into making the MMEs, is because Dr. Pierce, a neurologist, was using those pads to treat his Parkinson's and his MS patients and found that they were getting a certain level of improvement just from sleeping on the magnetic pads. And so he says, why don't you make them stronger? So we kept working on it, building them stronger and stronger. So this is, you know, it's been a, shall we say, a trip, okay? Learning more and more as we went. Now, give you a little more insight into the frequency thing. And first of all, the work that's being done at Johns Hopkins, just using cell cultures, that we made a device for them they could put in the incubator, and using cell cultures, they could actually increase ATP levels with just a static magnetic field by 38%. No frequency involved, no brain connected. Now we get a lot more when we connect it to the brain, because you have that pulsed field at a frequency of the tissue it's targeting. Now, another question leads me to what you're saying. That bed will regenerate tissues. I'm going to tell you a story about what a doctor told me here 3 years ago. I was in Chicago to a health meeting, and he says, you don't know how powerful that bed is. And I said, well, I didn't think it was very powerful. And he said, well, I can tell you how powerful it is. My daughter went off to Jamaica and had 2 weeks of vacation there, came back and started going downhill. Now, she's 33 years old, and at the end of the treatment, they couldn't find anything at all, and they were doctors in Chicago, so they put her in the hospital and watched her deteriorate down to where she was unconscious, couldn't even breathe. She was on a respirator, and they asked him if he wanted to have her disconnected from life support. He said, no, I want one more MRI of her brain. It was full of holes all over the brain. Now, I told you this once before. Some of you heard it, and some of you haven't. Just, they give her the right antibiotic for it because they did a needle biopsy, and they took it out, and they found that she recovered to the point where she could breathe. Just sleeping on that magnetic pad after he took her home, she could breathe on her own, but she's still unconscious. She was able to actually go back to work in 6 months. They did another MRI, and she was completely normal. With the exception of a little spot with the hole that was as big as my thumb had not recovered. Now, that's an example. What have we... lecture tonight was on longevity that you didn't get to see. So let's go to that. And did you get your question answered, or did I talk around it too many ways? Huh? Early on, when we first invented the magnetic pad, I sent it over to Dr. Gumio, who is head of Project Genesis at the World Health Organization, and he deals with longevity. And I asked him, I want to know whether this increases longevity or decreases longevity, because we were worried that maybe it caused cancer. Everything sped up and made cancer cells grow. he called me back up and he says, "This is phenomenal." I said, "What did you do?" He says, "Well, I took 23 different kinds of insects and put them in a cage and fed them properly with the proper food, and I put a control group in another room, and the insects in the magnetic field of the magnetic bed live 5 times longer than the control group." Now that's a big deal, 5 times longer. Now, I said, well, that's insects. Maybe they're different than us. So he made another experiment. I told you about this the other day, I think, too. Human tissue cultures in the magnetic field. They live 2.5 times longer. So we knew that something was going on there that was pretty good for longevity. So then we had University of Virginia do a study on people sleeping on the magnetic pads. There was 925 people in the study over 3.5 years. And they found that the people on the pads had a 76% reduction in new incidence of cancer and an 87% reduction in new incidence of cardiovascular disease. We didn't know why. We just thought things were working better. We were providing energy, so the body's vitality was to enhance the immune system, so we actually had a much better immune system. But then the next thing we learned, and that was from Norm Shealy, he did tests on free radicals, and he found that there was an 80% reduction in free radicals in women sleeping on the pad at 3 o'clock in the afternoon after sleeping on the magnetic pad the night before. And that is probably the reason why there's an enhancement of longevity, simply because you have a much lower free radical level, which, again, is what ages us. So we're talking about longevity here. There's other things involved in longevity. Right now, cardiovascular disease is #1 as far as our death rate is concerned. You remember in that study, 87% reduction in the new incidence of cardiovascular disease and no sleeping on the pad? Now we've found...
How many patients were studied?
Pardon?
How many patients were studied?
925.
Over 3.5 years?
Over 3.5 years. Cardiovascular disease. That's a big deal if you can clean those arteries out and make them start functioning properly. And we have a study going on now. There's 14 patients in it, and we're showing by doing angiograms and angioscopes that we're actually cleaning out the plaque out of the arteries. In the lecture I gave yesterday, I showed how that we actually increased the level of metals in the lining of the arteries and in the body. So there's more excretion of toxic metals. So that's one phase of increasing longevity. If you can eliminate cardiovascular disease, that's a big block of aging. How about cancer? The reason I made that MME, which is the 10,000-pound electromagnet, was to treat cancer, because people were calling me up and saying, I didn't do anything else. They've given me up to die, and I slept on that magnetic pad, and now I don't have cancer anymore. Do you think that has anything to do with it? They were just using it for pain. Interesting enough, it wasn't what we thought, but they were actually converting their, shall we say, maybe I'm going too far here. They were repairing the genetic defects that was causing the problem. And we didn't know that at first, but then we made some people got well. We put a whole bunch of them out there, and some people got well from cancer, some didn't. So we made them stronger and stronger until we ended up with a 10,000-pound device. And that worked wonderful on both kinds of brain cancer, astrocytomas and glioblastomas, and on lung cancer, and on breast cancer. But it didn't work for ovarian cancer or melanomas.
How many Gauss
Those people were subjected to 5,000 Gauss going perpendicular to the body. Okay, so for 2.5 years we treated nothing but cancer. until the College of Physicians and Surgeons decided that we shouldn't, so we had to quit. And so now we just treat them with the magnetic bed again, and we use nutrients to help, and works wonderful. It's a great combination of the two together. And nobody gets excited about that. And it's not as effective as the strong magnetic field, but at least it enhances the effect. As a matter of fact, I gave a lecture about this some time ago, and the fellow from the clinic just over the border in Mexico says, I got a proposal. Let's put them on half our beds here in our clinic, and we'll see if indeed, because he primarily treated cancer, we'll see what the outcomes are. And he called me back 2 months later and says, we got to put them on all the beds. I said, what happened? He said, our outcomes was twice as good on the ones we had the magnetic pads on as the ones we didn't. And he said that was a blind study because we had them covered up, so the doctors didn't know which was which. So now, do you want to prevent cancer? It's number 2. Get on a magnetic bed. Why does that work? Well, you have a lot less free radicals causing problems, genetic problems. You have a lot stronger immune system because you have the vitality to stimulate the immune system. So it's a good preventative. That's why in that study it showed such a reduction in the new incidence of cancer.
What was the percentage reduction again?
70, that was 78%. And that was only with a 5 Gauss magnetic pad, I want to point out, not with a 20 Gauss.
So I see that the MME is not available here in this country, is that?
No, not for cancer,
Not for cancer.
for everything else, except inflammation. We can't treat bacterial diseases or anything like that. I can tell you just about everything. All neurologic, all orthopedic, liver, and yeah, I guess they've included now kidneys. Okay. So this gives you a little question there.
Is it not possible to do it here like that most clinics in Germany do it? They have their normal treatments, which are permitted, but then they have like a wellness center almost to every clinic associated where they then use these treatments. Yeah,
the doctors that are using the MMEs right now aren't working on that, under that condition. They just have MME centers, and so it isn't working that way. And we're trying to keep it quite, you might say, pure, if you want, with the exception of Jonathan Wright. Now he tries everything, and so that's not a problem.
So if you have a diagnosis of cancer in most clinics with MMEs, won't take you?
No, you just go and get treated for pain. So we don't want to know that you had cancer at all. We don't want it on your chart.
Your company still makes them? That's my question now.
Do we still make the large devices?
The MMEs, yeah.
MMEs? Yes, we do. We have about 11 of them in stock.
Is there any validity to positioning the bed from the north pole to the south, or fault lines, or?
Good question. The fault lines aren't the problem. Positioning your bed north and south, if you don't have a magnetic pad, is beneficial because it has to do with, again, the perpendicular angle of the earth magnetic field to the nerves and the magnetic field that the nerve is putting out. So if you don't have a magnetic pad, north is by far the best, south is second best, and the other ways are not good. Okay? Now, once you have a magnetic bed, you're making a perpendicular magnetic field, and so it doesn't make any difference. Any more questions before we go on? Okay, let's talk about, we're talking about longevity and things that improves your longevity. Without the slides here, we're just talking about some of the other things that are attacking us today. Fibromyalgia. There's, seems like there's a rash of it. It's becoming very prevalent. 20 million people in the United States supposedly have fibromyalgia right now. We did a study at the University of Virginia using just the 5 Gauss magnetic bed. We had a 34% reduction in pain on fibromyalgia patients. They told me to make them stronger. That's why we make them stronger. And now we have a much better, higher degree of reduction in pain and improvement in quality of life. I'm going to tell you a story about chronic fatigue. And this kind of bears into what we're talking about here. There's a lot of chronic fatigue and allergies going around. Matter of fact, the lectures I went to last weekend, it was all about the allergies that cause the breakdown of the mucosa in the intestinal tract, which in turn starts the whole progress of disease. Anyhow, let's go to this story. A lady walked in my office. She was 40 years old. And she says, I hear you do miracles. And I says, no. The pads help people out, but I don't do miracles. I'm not a miracle man. And she says, well, I've tried 17 physicians here in town, and the first 14 told me I was crazy, and the last 3 were alternative doctors, and the first one told me I had to get all my teeth out, and all my silver fillings out, all the silver fillings out of my teeth. And the second one says I got a lot worse, by the way, when that happened. So the next one says, oh, you're not having enough vitamins and minerals. So he put me on all the vitamins and minerals. I went home with a basket of them, and I felt a little bit better. The third one says, oh, you need to be chelated. And he stuck a needle in my arm, and I sat there for 3 hours, and I did that until I had no more money left. And this lady had money to start with. And she says, I got progressively worse, to the point now where I can only eat 3 foods, because I'm allergic to everything else. I've had to take everything out of my house that had a chemical. The rugs went out, the chemical solvents, everything went out, because I'm allergic to them all. He says, I can be up 3 or 4 hours a day, and that's it. He says, life stinks. And I said, well, I can see why it would. And she says, so what can you do for me? I said, well, I'll tell you what. Unfortunately, all these people along the way didn't know what they were doing. They had a degree, but they didn't know what they were doing. I can tell you right now that you had mercury toxicity, and nobody has addressed the problem. Mercury toxicity. Mercury toxicity. Yes, you hear that? Mercury toxicity. Okay. We got to get that mercury out of you before your brain can start functioning. Without your brain functioning, you have no vitality and you have no immune system. You're going to be allergic to everything. He says, well, you're wasting your time. I have no money. I told you I had no money. I said, well, that's fine. We'll put a magnetic pad in your car. If you have somebody, it'll put it on your bed. And we'll give you DMSA. I gave her enough DMSA to last her for a couple of months. And I said, you go home and sleep on the pad, take the DMSA, and you pay me when you're well. A month later, I got a check in the mail. I called up and I said, what's wrong? I thought you had no money. Something's going on here. She says, yeah. She says, it's exciting. I got my old job back. I'm working 8 hours a day. 2 more months came by. She says, I need some more DMSA. I said, what's going on? Oh, she says, life is great. I got a new boyfriend. I lost my husband over this thing, and I got a new boyfriend. And she says, I'm not allergic to anything. You see, if we poison the body, you can't expect it to work, can you? And one of the first things that happens when you're under stress, and she was a businesswoman under a lot of stress, you start pulling that mercury into your brain, into the astrocyte cells of the brain, which convert chemical energy to electrical energy. That generator stops. And when that generator stops, then you're not resonating the tissues of the body, and you're not resonating the bones, and the thymus, and the spleen and all of these different organs, and so the immune system goes in the toilet. And you get any number of diseases. Now let's talk about MS. Now fortunately we have some background to know why our magnetic pad was working with MS and why the MME was working with MS. Johns Hopkins has done an extensive genetic study, and they found that we actually start making more oligodendrites, which makes the amyloid sheath that has been destroyed in MS. And this is a big deal because we found clinically that it worked, but we didn't have any backup. And they took and used little tissue cultures and put it in the device I had made for them, and they found that they caused the oligodendrites to differentiate and proliferate. So we know why we're getting some benefit there. That's a big deal. It's published. Secondly, we know why we are having benefit with Parkinson's. We're just going through some of the common diseases here, which is going to enhance your longevity. They took P12 cells, which are Parkinson's disease cells, what makes the acetylcholine, and they found that we enhance their function. This is a genetic study. So now we know there's a reason why we're getting benefit with Parkinson's disease. But we learned early on that we had to clean the mercury out of those cells in the substantia nigra in order to maintain it. You could give them a short treatment and they did well, or they sleep on the magnetic pad and they do better, but we had to treat them over a long period of time to get that mercury out of that part of the brain that makes the acetylcholine. So all of these are diseases that are attacking us today and causing a decrease in our longevity. So this is a big deal. Now, I want to relate this to what Dr. Williams is doing here. Early on when we started the magnetic pads, we took and had aura pictures done. People would lay on our magnetic pads, and guess what would happen to their aura? It'd be way down and there'd be holes in it. They'd go 20 minutes later and have their aura taken, a great big yellow aura. What's going on here? Norm Shealy had the answer to that. He found that the brain was operated at a much higher voltage. And so we were throwing an electromagnetic field out into the air. Okay? And this is the part of the reason you're healing. It's just an indication, another indication that you're running at a higher voltage. And when you're running at high voltage, you're actually going to enhance your longevity. Now, what's low voltage? Contrary to what our friend led you to believe yesterday, Dr. Pollack, the pulsed electromagnetic field that's coming from the brain during the day is about 11 to 12 hertz. 10 to 12 hertz actually is the range. In emergency, it'll go up to 30 hertz. But that's at a Gauss level. If you were to take and measure that flowing down any particular area which it's targeting, it's at a Gauss level of 0.025 Gauss. That's a lot more than what he was talking about. So you can charge yourself up so that you have a much stronger electromagnetic field going to the body, which in turn is going to affect all of the atoms in the body. And that's what you want to run at, is high voltage, like Gary Gordon. He runs it at very high voltage. I imagine if we measured him, he'd probably be about a half Gauss running down his nerves. Because we found a great difference. When you're sick, the voltage drops. And when you're well, the voltage goes up. And this enhances your voltage, and we found that definitely. We doubled the voltage just by sleeping on that the night before at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
confused a little bit because you say that our brain's constantly making voltage and we're at about, what, say, during the day,
0.025.
Okay, 0.025 Gauss.
Yeah, okay, we need to go back into physics a little bit. You have resistance, you have amperage, and you have voltage. They're all reciprocals of the other. In other words, you increase the voltage, you'll increase, pardon me, you'll increase the amperage. You increase the resistance, you'll increase the voltage, but you decrease the amperage, okay? So if you run it at really high voltages, then you have more electrical flow, and the more electrical flow, you have more magnetic field you have, because anytime electricity flows, you have a magnetic field. And now the more resistance you have, and this is really interesting too, say you had a technic contraction in a muscle, and it was in a spasm. You can't get any electricity through that to speak of. And it basically is blocked right out because the resistance is so high. So when you lay over there, you will get rid of a lot of your pains because you're breaking the technic contraction because you have enough voltage to get the electricity through to relax the muscle. You need that electricity through there to get proper muscle tone. You're in a technic contraction. Now, so increase your voltage.
I was just confused again because I'm thinking back to what you said.
Voltage is like
MME,
pressure.
When using the MME, you said if you had any frequency at all, that was going through that you would interfere with repair.
That's
and
exactly.
I would say that we normally have this frequency going, so how do you ever get to repair?
All you want to do, okay, that's the brain's frequency, and through biofeedback, it knows exactly what frequency is the resonance frequency of the tissue it's targeting. You want to stay out of the way of the brain and enhance its function. So you'll not only make higher voltage here, but you'll have a lot better feel for it to work in here. So you'll get a lot more resonance. Matter of fact, I told you about the girl that resonated so much she thought her liver was going to resonate right out. And the guy that his arm was broken, he kept looking at it and he says, "That's sure vibrating." Okay? That's because we provided a field that interacted with the brain's electromagnetic field to cause this resonance to happen. This is so important because this is very basic to everything that is going on here in this lecture series, I guess we would call it, okay? You need a good base to have optimum effect. There isn't any of these treatments that these guys are giving that isn't enhanced by people being on a magnetic ped. We found that with acupuncture. And we found that in our clinics. We have one of those machines. And we found that it enhanced it. Because you have a basic magnetic field. Just like Becker said, you increase the earth magnetic field, then you'll enhance the resonance. Okay? And the effect. I'm talking about Robert O. Becker, the great doctor that invented your PEMF device that you use today. That's the end of the lecture, and is there any questions now?
Well, you've studied mercury, and you find that it's going to be a lifetime program to get rid of mercury.
Okay, good question. Right now, the Chinese are putting on a new coal-fired power plant 5 days a week. Their coal is full of mercury. They put big stacks up. It goes up in the atmosphere and comes over and condenses on the Sierra Nevada mountains and on the west side of the Rockies, to the point that the Fish and Game in California has put out notices not to eat the trout in the streams up there because they're so loaded with mercury. You see, there is no high mountains between us and them, and so you get the condensation on these mountains here. So, is there mercury in our water? There's mercury in our food. There's mercury in our fish that is getting to be very, very bad. And if you're going to eat fish, eat salmon and get Atlantic salmon because it has very low mercury content compared to the fish down here.
Atlantic salmon is farm-raised salmon.
It has a lot more. Alaska salmon is what you want. Wild Alaska salmon. I said Atlantic, I'm sorry. Atlantic salmon is better than other, but you don't want Atlantic salmon, you want Alaska salmon, okay? It's not as polluted.
How long is it gonna take to get mercury out of a tough case?
Out of a tough case, you'll never get it all out because you're continually taking more in. But you'll get the main burden down, as we talk about burden, down in about 3 months. So they start operating properly.
So is it every day or do you take 2-day breaks?
When I'm treating chronic fatigue, I give them 500 milligrams of DMSA every night for the first month. I also have them take a multi-mineral every morning when they get up. Never take the two together. You take the DMSA at night and the multi-mineral in the morning. Secondly, after that, then it's 1 week on, 1 week off for 2 more months. Okay? Again, multi-mineral. Okay? Because we're trying to build some tissue here and we don't know whether the DMSA is taking out any or not. There's a lot of controversy about that. So be safe. Give them the multi-mineral. It's good for them anyhow. Secondly, after that, it's once a month for the next 6 months. 1 week. Once a month.
One week, every month.
That's right, for the rest of the year. Okay? Then after that, it's 1 week every 6 months. These are people, now we're talking that were really mercury toxic.
What's the major source of mercury? Is it the mouth or the air?
The major source, I don't think the air is near as bad as the mouth.
So, in other words, if you would approximate the total mercury in a human being, would you think if they had 10 fillings and they lived in San Francisco, it'd be half from the contribution from China? Because the Chinese, when I say air, I mean, I really meant China. So,
Okay, I'll give you an example there. I had a doctor come to me. He had chronic fatigue, very bad chronic fatigue, couldn't practice and the whole thing. And I said, well, what happened? Give me the history. And he said, this is a doctor from New York. And he said, I went to my physician because I was having angina. And he took me off all my red meat and put me on fish. 6 months, I couldn't practice anymore. And now here I am with a full-blown case of chronic fatigue a year later. No red meat in that whole time. They did his mercury test. It was right off, up to the top of the chart. Just from eating the fish. Now, that was all he had was fish, as far as his meat was concerned. So that's a big factor. But most people don't eat that much fish and seafood. So that isn't his biggest factor as the mercury amalgams in the mouth. And there, for 4 hours after you've chewed anything, you have that mercury vapor coming out into your mouth, which is condensing there on the mucous membranes. It's also going into your lungs. It's 80% absorbable in the lungs. And so anybody with more than 4 amalgam fillings in their mouth is at a toxic level in their body of mercury. Now, if you have no stress, the cells won't need to pick that up because they're not bringing in positive ions to keep the intercellular potential up. So if you can eliminate stress, and I don't know very many people that can, then you don't have to worry about mercury from anywhere.
No, the question is if you have patients who have mercury amalgams in their mouth and they can't afford to get to a dentist quickly enough, can they use the DMSA and the magnetic bed and still reduce their burden, or are they going to reduce?
We do that every time. Not a problem. And we thought they couldn't do that at first, and then we took and laid them on the magnetic bed, used the scintillometer to measure the mercury vapor, and the mercury was locked in by the silver from laying on the magnetic bed because the silver was at a much higher energy level, so they could be having mercury effervescing out into their mouth, vaporizing into their mouth. We lay them down there. 10 minutes later, there was no mercury. No mercury vapor. That's right. It is amazing. So that's why you want to treat to get the mercury out at night when they got it locked in. Okay? I misspoke. Alaska salmon. That's what you want. Any more questions before we close it down?
Well, do you think you need to take the zeolite and the DMSA?
Well, if they have organic toxins, definitely zeolite. DMSA doesn't do anything for that. And so you need to look at it and see what toxins they've been exposed to. And so we use a lot of zeolite. The zeolite works for both, but the DMSA is far more aggressive.
Have you seen many people get side effects from the DMSA?
I was one after a long period of time. I've seen, I think, one other, and we've given prescriptions for that for years for probably thousands of people now.
And just 2 people.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
So it's not that bad, and we're only giving a quarter dose when we're giving 500 milligrams DMSA. That's going to keep your reactions down a long ways by giving such light dose.
So even like someone that's only 80 pounds, 90 pounds, that's not...
Then that gets to be 80, 90 pounds. That gets to be about a half a dose.
Oh, 250 milligrams?
Yeah. No.
How many is in a capsule?
Oh, I see what you mean.
How much is in
Well, Vitamin Research now is selling 100 milligram capsules. So is Thorne. And if you do a prescription to one of the compounders, they're going to put 500 milligrams in there unless you tell them otherwise.
Yeah, I used to give, I don't do it now because I don't use those, but I used to give like DMSA capsules, I think 500 milligrams.
At bedtime.
3 times a week.
3 times a week. Okay. It kind of builds. So if you can theoretically it don't build up. Okay. It's supposed to be all out of your body in 6 hours. But I just found that if I do it every night, I get a better effect. And there's a certain amount of being mobilized by the magnetic pad and by what you're eating. So if you keep that stuff flowing out of the body on a continual basis, you're going to get people well faster. That's all.
And you were saying that the pad stops the mercury vapor from coming off?
That's exactly right. That was tested independently. So only while they're laying on it. When they're up walking around, again, it'll come back.
Why take the DMSA at night then the mercury vapor's not coming off?
Why take it at that?
Yeah, why take it?
That's the fillings that's not coming off. It's coming out of the cells like everything. Yeah, we're raising the intercellular potential so it becomes so positive inside that it pushes the positive ions out, including organic toxins as well as metals. Any more? I've overrun my time.
We're talking about the resonance frequencies from 0 to 7.5 hertz versus the brain frequency 10 to 12 hertz.
That's the daytime frequency that the brain operates at, 10 to 12 hertz.
And but the 0 to 7.5 hertz frequency that the body, how does that correlate with the
That's the resonance frequency of the tissues of the body. You see, one will divide into everything, okay? And we're made so that we have different resonance frequencies for different organs. Like the liver will usually resonate at around 5 hertz, somewhere up and down around 5 hertz. The reason for that is that they only resonate for 20 seconds. And then it moves on to the next one. That's why we have these sleep cycles all night long, 4 or 5 of them. And so you can resonate all the different tissues at night.
So the brain frequency 10 to 12 hertz gets translated to lower frequencies in the other tissues?
The brain has any number of frequencies. It can go up to 10,000 hertz if it needs to. It through biofeedback, knows what the tissue needs. You want to get out of the way and let it work. Now, We have Wayne Harris over here. He tells you to take a lot of that good vitamin C. Well, what does the good vitamin C do? That changes the frequency in the mitochondria and in the cell. So it's at a higher frequency. And so you're getting more bang for your buck from the electricity that's flowing from the brain. It's a high energy compound, so it enhances the frequencies. It all works together. There isn't anything that Gary makes that isn't enhanced by the use of enhanced earth magnetic field. You enhance the absorption, you enhance the utilization, all the way down. I guess that's it. You've had enough of this.